closed captioning provided by Beaufort County.
Okay, good morning. Welcome. So glad to see all your faces. Thanks for being here today. I think all of you know me, but I am Jocelyn Steiger, the Government Affairs Director for the Hilton Head Area Realtors and the Beaufort-Jasper County Realtors. It's great to see such a committed group of local leaders, staff, members of the Regional Citizens Committee, and our realtor leaders gathered to talk about what residents want when it comes to growth, development, and planning. Today's presentation is the result of a true community collaboration. If you're a member of the Regional Citizens Committee, would you please stand? Thank you. This group of current and former elected officials, chamber leaders, and local stakeholders not only helped guide this effort, they are our coalition partners. The idea for this research came from them following the failure of the penny transportation sales tax referendum last election. I am also a member of the Regional Citizens Committee and was able to offer this poll through the partnership our associations have with the National Association of REALTORS. As realtors, we are not just in the business of buying and selling homes. We're invested in building healthy, vibrant communities. We care about strong schools, thriving local businesses, affordable housing, and infrastructure that keeps up with growth. That's why we are proud to support local governments with resources like this. Let's take a moment and ask the elected officials and administrative staff from our municipalities to please stand. I know all of you, but I want to be sure others in the room recognize you, and we thank you for your service in being part of today's conversation. As I said, this is a conversation, not just a presentation. Please ask questions when the time comes and share your thoughts. We have on the table printed highlights of the data. It is broken down by county as a whole, then City of Beaufort, Bluffton, Hilton Head Island, and unincorporated Beaufort County, including Port Royal. Port Royal was not separated out because it was a smaller sampling. And Hardyville, I know you'll find this data helpful as you grow and develop your city. When we work with the National Association of REALTORS through their grant program, which funded this study, we had the opportunity to work with our presenter, Joe Goode. Joe is the Chief Research Officer at Statera Solutions. Goode conducts poll opinion surveys and provides strategic advice for trade associations, nonprofit groups, and corporations. He has worked for and advised organizations, local governments, and political campaigns for more than 30 years as a pollster, consultant, and executive. Goode has worked closely with the National Association of REALTORS since 2007, providing opinion research and consulting services for state and local associations in all 50 states and hundreds of localities. Before coming to Statera in 2007, Goode was Chief Operating Officer and Senior Analyst at the polling firm Greenberg, Quinnen, and Rosner. He has also worked as Vice President at the polling firm Lake Research Partners. So please join me in welcoming Joe Goode.
All right, good morning. You guys hear me okay? Great. Sorry, apologies in advance for missing 2 weeks ago. I came down with COVID and that wouldn't have been fun. I couldn't get out of the room. So thank you for joining us this morning. And hopefully I can make this interesting and engaging for you. We're going to go over this morning the results of our county survey, Beaufort County survey that we conducted in May. This is a random sample poll. I'm going to give you a little bit of detailing about the poll and how it was conducted and just some of those intellectual things, just so you know where we're coming from. And then we're going to jump into the numbers. It's going to be a lot of numbers. I apologize in advance for that, but some of you are going to find some of it very interesting. Maybe other parts you may fade off for a little bit, but I'll try and keep this engaging and in context as we walk through it. The poll itself is going to cover quality of life issues. We're going to go a little bit into some priorities that local residents have. We're going to talk a little bit about housing and a little bit about traffic and transportation as well. So hopefully this will be very engaging. If I could ask you to hold off on your questions till the end, I may answer your questions as we go along, and then we can have a good conversation hopefully after the survey. If there's something that just really isn't clear to you or you just really are puzzled by, raise your hand and maybe we can cover it while we're doing the presentation. But hopefully this will be a little bit interesting and fun, and then we can have a good conversation about growth and development in Beaufort County moving forward. So, first of all, let's talk about the technical parts of this. This is what we call a random sample survey. We interviewed 600 registered voters in Beaufort County. Now, the way that works is, I know everybody says nobody ever calls me, right? But we do indeed still are able to reach out to folks. We do what's now called hybrid sampling. So we do both live interviews and we text. Maybe some of you in this room got the text. So you get a text, you click on the link, and it takes you to a place where you can take the poll. So we were able to do a sample size of 600 voters selected at random, the registered voters in the county. And that's going to give us an overall margin of error of about plus or minus 4 percentage points. The survey itself was conducted right at the end of May, from May 27th, 28th, and 29th. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this is a relatively larger sample size. Usually you're doing about 400 in a county. We did the larger sample so we could also break out regions of Beaufort County. So we have Hilton Head, Bluffton, Beaufort, and then the unincorporated areas of the county. It's going to say rest of the county. I apologize, I don't mean to insult anybody from Hardyville or anywhere else, but we just had to do all those other things. But when we're looking at the subsamples, keep in mind that there's going to be fewer interviewers in there, and therefore the margin of error within each subsample is a little bit larger. Now, I'm going to show you what's statistically significant. I'm going to show you some of the variations between the 4 regions. But do keep in mind that as we get to smaller sample sizes, the margin of error is a little bit higher for those of you who want to geek out on things like that. Now, I do use a process called weighting to make sure that once we get all the data in, we make sure that it's representative of registered voters in Beaufort County as a whole. The big variation to Beaufort, of course, is we have a lot of senior citizens in Beaufort County. 40% of our poll respondents are senior citizens. That's going to be reflective of the folks who are on the voter file. You also have a few more homeowners than you would if you were including all adults 18 plus as opposed to registered voters. But otherwise, everything is pretty much set up so that we're representative of registered voters in the county. So from there, we're going to start with some of the fun stuff. We start with some questions about quality of life and attitudes on development. And our first question we ask folks is, overall, how would you describe the quality of life in Beaufort County? Excellent, good, just fair, or poor? This is what we call a closed-ended question, and they can pick from that result. So you're going to see here that folks in Beaufort County like Beaufort County, all right? Overall, 82% call the quality of life either excellent or good. 27% excellent, 54% good, only 14% just fair, and 4% poor. Now this is real similar to what I would see when I ask this question all over the country. Folks tend to like where they live. So when you get something though that 82% agree on something in this day and age, that's pretty good, right? There aren't a whole lot of things that we're in general agreement on. The one thing that I would note about these numbers is that the intensity is a little lower than what I see in some other places. In places where folks are like really jazzed, really feeling great about their county, this number tends to be in the mid-30s, a little bit higher. And this number might be a little bit lower. There's usually a little bit of trade-off. And that's what I'm looking for as a pollster is intensity. And so the fact that you're just a little bit under that 30%, it kind of says something about some of the frustrations that we're going to see about later on in the poll. Now, if you break this out by region, here's what happens. Look at Hilton Head. 36% feel the quality of life is excellent, and 58% feel the quality of life is good. So if you're on Hilton Head, that's 94% calling quality of life excellent or good. That's the kind of intensity and overall numbers that you see in places where the whole county is just really jazzed, really feeling great about how things are going. When you get down to Bluffton, you see how that excellent number drops a little bit down to 30%. But that's still, again, a very solid score. Again, 85% excellent or good. When you get to the kind of unincorporated areas of county, look at how that intensity number drops off a little bit down to 20%. And then in Beaufort, again, 19%. So again, I don't want you walking out here and saying, hey, that pollster guy said that the people in the rest of the county of Beaufort don't like the quality of life. They do, all right? 74 and 71% calling it excellent or good. But what I'm looking at is that intensity and how it drops off as you get into the unincorporated areas in Beaufort. Now, there's also some interesting differences by age. Our older residents are 31% excellent, 87% overall excellent or good. But if you're under 50, that intensity again drops off a little bit to just 20% excellent and 51% good. You're also going to see some variance by education, age, and race. Our college-educated registered voters, 32% excellent, 60% good. So they're feeling pretty great about everything. But contrast that with our younger non-college residents. You see the quality of life there really drops off, only 14% excellent and 50% good. You also see a gap between white residents and people of color, and between homeowners, which is about 80% of the county, and non-homeowners. So again, you see some of the demographic variances. These are county-wide numbers on the quality of life. Now, what we wanted to do when we were talking with Jocelyn is, just given the huge growth and development that you guys have experienced here, was really kind of get a sense of how has the quality of life changed and how do people see the quality of life thinking moving forward. So we said, in the past 3 years, do you think the quality of life in Beaufort County has gotten better, gotten worse, or stayed about the same? You guys answering that in your head, personally? Okay, so here's what's happening. If you looked at this overall, 45% say it's about the same, but 42% say in the last 3 years the quality of life has gotten worse. That's a pretty high number. Usually I don't see that number north of 30%, so that's pretty high. Only 12% feel like the quality of life has gotten better in the last 3 years. Now again, you're going to see some variance here. Folks in Bluffton, 47% worse. Rest of the county, 44%. Beaufort, 42%. Hilton Head, they're a little more majority. Things are staying about the same, but even in Hilton Head, you've got 32% who feel like the quality of life has gotten a little worse. So here's your first clue that folks are a little concerned about what's been happening, population growth and development in the county, and they really feel like things have gotten a little worse in the last couple of years. You're going to see the same kind of breakouts if you have been in the county for 11 years or more. 45% feel the quality of life has gotten worse. If you've only been in the county for less than 10 years, or 10 years or less, it's 37% worse. So that's kind of a difference in degree, not magnitude, right? But everybody's kind of feeling a little worse about how the quality of life is going. And there's a little bit of difference by age and gender, whereas women over the age of 50, 45% worse, compared to men over the age of 50, they're kind of like, 51%, things have stayed about the same. So again, you're seeing, I think your takeaway from this is how folks are seeing things have gotten worse in the last couple of years. Now, we followed this question up with thinking ahead over the next 3 years. Do you think the quality of life in Beaufort County is going to get better or worse or stay about the same? And Americans tend to be aspirational, they tend to be optimistic, right? Well, here you've got 46% of county residents are a little worried that things are going to continue to get worse in the next 3 years. Again, that's a pretty high number. You think that almost half the county is looking over the next 3 years and they see quality of life problems on the horizon. It's going to be true no matter where you're at. Bluffton, 50%. Beaufort, 47%. Rest of the county, 43%. Even in Hilton Head, 41% feel like the quality of life is going to be getting worse in the next 3 years. So again, as elected officials, I think you need to kind of incorporate that in as planning and thinking about things. Folks are a little concerned about where we're going in terms of quality of life. You're going to see some of the same differences. Women tend to be a little more concerned. Older women especially at 53% seeing things as worse. Older men, again, are kind of not really very optimistic about how things are going, and they're that kind of about the same tends to be that kind of a negative feeling. Our white residents, 48% worse, people of color, 38%. People of color tend to be a little more optimistic compared to everybody else at 28%, feeling things will get better. So that's the quality of life questions, and that kind of gives you a sense of the general mood. Now, what I like to do in the polling is then ask our respondents, hey, what is one thing, what's one change that would most improve the quality of life in Beaufort County? And we don't give many responses. This is what we call an open-ended or a verbatim question. And everybody either types in their answer or tells my interviewer their answers. I have 600 quotes from 600 respondents. We'll make those available to you if you'd like to read through them. I'm going to show you some examples here. But it's a good way for us to kind of look at things and kind of get that nuance, like really hear from people in their own words, what they're thinking, where they're at. So I read through them all, my staff reads through them all, and then we code them. Right, so I want to code them so that I can kind of make them manageable as to what are the things that could happen that could improve quality of life. So what do you think is going to happen on this question? When we code things, improving traffic, roads, and public transportation, 44% of our respondents said something about traffic, about the roads, about the bridges. That would be the one thing that would most improve the quality of life. Right behind that, there's a real pushback on just reducing development, getting development under control, doing something to stop, to kind of be smarter growth about how we're doing development. A lot of questions about that. I'll show you some of these quotes. Then you had 10% who volunteered. Again, the only three questions they've heard at this point are those quality of life, going to get better, going to get worse. 10% of our respondents voluntarily raised housing costs, housing affordability. And then you have a little bit of reducing crime, lower cost of living. But these were the groups that most came out from all of our respondents in terms of what they would see to do to improve the quality of life. So what are some of those quotes? Kind of starting over here. Traffic control, huge priority. Access to Hilton Head is becoming more difficult. If a solution is not started soon, it will significantly affect the quality of the island. I would say replacing the bridge with access to the island, expanding the road system with access to the island. Town is growing, they've got to handle traffic better. I would say infrastructure, roadways, highways, they should do something about Highway 46. Infrastructure, so it would improve traffic issues with tourist season. We have lots of speeders apparently here in Beaufort County. Somebody is very concerned about that. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of the flavor of the types of quotes that we have. Again, you might want to read through them all and get some of that. Here's the flavor of the reduced development, managing population. It is to manage growth. It's getting too crowded. There's not enough infrastructure to handle the population. Too much overbuilding, infrastructure not keeping up with the amount of building and population growth. County is overbuilt. We do not have the resources to support the current infrastructure. Unfortunately, due to overdevelopment, the area is already damaged beyond repair. This is where I came from, Cape Cod. Strongly considering leaving due to increased crime, overdevelopment, traffic issues. So you can see that there's some pent-up stuff. I didn't have any trouble getting my respondents to kind of tell me what they thought was wrong and what could happen to kind of improve that quality of life. When it came to housing, we also had some very, cost of renting and home prices unreasonably high. Rent reduction, when you rent here, you go by the income, you have to make 3 times the amount of rent they have. Affordability of homes and land, more available housing, better rent control on housing, more affordable housing for seniors and working class people, as well as professional teachers, bus drivers, and education of children. So again, just trying to give you a little bit of a flavor of those quotes, but it's really all about traffic, doing something about the roads, conditions, something about growth, the number of people who are moving in. That's really affecting how people see their quality of life, and housing also registered in double digits on that quality of life question. So from there, we did want to do a little bit of grading, or how much trust do you have in the Beaufort County government to do what is right? And we also asked overall, how would you rate the job being done by your county and local governments in managing growth and development in Beaufort County? Everybody ready? All right. Over here, trust in county government. 4% trust you just about always. 41% most of the time. 47% though, only some of the time. And 7% none of the time. So this is what we call in the polling profession being underwater. Right? You're 45% of the county is only trusting you Very few, just about always, and 41% most of the time. That's not horrible. I've seen much, much worse, trust me. But you really want, at a minimum, these numbers to be reversed. You want that 54% to be on the positive side. Again, we're in a time in America where people just don't have a lot of faith in institutions and government. I don't need to tell you that. But still, you still want to see at the county level, there tends to be a little more faith, and you'd really like those numbers to be reversed. So there is some sense out there among county residents. It's not that kind of feeling that you can trust you to do what's right most of the time. When we ask about the job being done by county and local government managing growth and development, excellent, good, just, fair, or poor, well, not surprisingly, given what we just saw in some of the growth issues, most folks feel plurality, you're just doing a fair job, 37%. 28% say poor, and 10% just, I don't know what to say. So only about 1/4 kind of feel like, hey, county governments are doing a good job, local governments are doing a job handling with this growth and development. And these are hard, questions, hard ratings, but that's kind of where folks are in terms of government. Now, we do also I wanted to quantify this sense of residential growth versus commercial growth. We knew coming into this there was going to be some concern about growth just given the amount you've had. So we asked our respondents, would you say that the pace of residential growth and development in Beaufort County is happening too fast, too slow, or at about the right pace? And would you say the pace of commercial growth and development in Beaufort County is happening at about the right amount or too fast? Here over here on the left is residential. We had 74% of respondents say that residential growth is happening too fast. That is really high. I'm going to give you some comparison numbers here in a second. When I used to ask this question 5-10 years ago, it never went over 50%. Since 2000, I've been seeing these numbers go up a lot, especially in southern counties where things are really high growth. But when you have 3/4 of people saying there's just too much growth happening, that's a lot. And even more interesting is the commercial growth. You have 55% who say that commercial growth is happening too fast. This is South Carolina, right? Where there's been so much effort to bring in jobs, bring in things, bring in industry. We have 55% who say even that's happening too fast. Now, to give you an idea how this compares to some other places where I've polled, I'm kind of limiting this to southeastern polls that I've done. You guys are almost, you're basically in a statistical tie as the highest I've ever seen. Compared to Lake and Sumter counties, those are adjacent to Orlando County in Florida, that's Disney World. They said 75%, that's the highest. You're at 74%. Tennessee, Rutherford County, that's right outside of Nashville, 70%. So again, if you incorporate a margin of error, you guys are tied for the highest I've ever seen on this question. Williamson County, that's right outside Nashville as well, 65%. Suffolk, 57%. North Charleston, your neighbors up here to the north, 49% say too fast. And Madison County, that's Huntsville, I believe, in Alabama, 44% too fast. So that's just kind of give you some context of where Beaufort County rates in like places that I've been polling in the last couple of years. That's an incredibly high number. It gives you a sense of just how much residents are struggling with all the residential growth that you've been seeing. And it would have been very similar on the commercial. I don't have those numbers here, but very simple. Okay, so from there, we've set the baseline with our respondents. They've talked to us a little bit about quality of life. They've talked to us a little bit about where their concerns are, what you can see do to improve that quality of life. So we wanted to get a sense of priorities. What are their priorities in terms of infrastructure? So we thought, still thinking about growth and development, which two of the following infrastructure improvements are most needed in your part of Beaufort County? And we gave them a couple of choices. We gave them road and bridge improvements, down here at the bottom, stormwater control and drainage systems, public transportation, water and sewer expansion, pedestrian and bike paths, and broadband internet. And we asked them to pick two of those. So not surprisingly, given all the traffic, 71%, and this is going to add up to 200%, okay, because we get two. 71% said road and bridge improvements. Just about everybody says, we got to do something about the roads. We got to do something about the bridges. Behind that, stormwater control and drainage systems. 38% of respondents said stormwater and drainage. Public transportation was high, 32%. Talked about the need for some kind of public transportation. Water and sewer expansion, 19%. So I guess you could add that water and sewer with stormwater, but we made that distinction. Pedestrian and bike paths, 18%, and better broadband internet, 16%. So again, everybody's really focused on road and bridge improvements in terms of infrastructure, and then you get kind of a mix here on stormwater, water control, public transportation, and then the last two were pedestrian and broadband internet. So we then wanted to get a sense of prioritizing things. And we gave folks a couple of issues to prioritize. We said, look, I'm going to read you some issues that people say should be a priority for local elected officials in Beaufort County. For each one, please tell me how high of a priority you think that issue should be for your local elected officials. And we tested 5 questions. Protecting open space like vacant land, marshes, forests, and farmland from development. Improving transportation and infrastructure like roads and bridges. Managing population growth and controlling development. Keeping taxes and fees under control. And creating more housing that's affordable to low and middle income people. So, there's a lot of priorities that we could have put in here, but these are the 5 that we decided to test. And we said rate that as either being a very high priority, a high priority, a medium priority, a low priority, or not a priority at all. So number 1, there's not going to be a whole lot of distinction between the top 3 here. 55% said protecting open space is a very high priority. Another 28% said it's a high priority. So I know as elected officials, you're going to be, oh, how does this help me, right? Because everybody's pretty much saying this is a very high priority. We're going to say the same thing, improving transportation and infrastructure. 52% very high priority, 34% fairly high priority. Managing population growth, 50% very high priority, 31% high priority. Keeping county taxes and fees under control, the intensity drops off a little bit, but you've still got almost 80% calling that a high priority. And then down at the bottom, creating more housing that's affordable, 31% very high priority, 29% high priority. So this is kind of a conundrum, right? Everybody's seeing these top 4 as either very high or high priority, 80%. How do you juggle those things? Because kind of voters want it all, right? They want to protect things. They want better roads. They want to manage this population growth. But look, there's still 60% who say we need more housing, and folks also want to keep their taxes under control. So this is the conundrum, right? And I know that you guys know this, but this kind of quantifies it for you in terms of where people are. There are some demographic variances here. Women tend to feel stronger about protecting open space, managing population growth, and creating more housing than men do. But again, that's just on the intensity side of things. When we talk about creating more housing that's affordable, that tends to be higher priority for non-homeowners, people of color, and our younger residents. But again, these again, just kind of variations within the demographics. I'm not saying that older people don't think these things are priorities, it's higher and more intense among our younger people. When you get this creating more housing that's affordable to lower and middle income people, our folks over at Hilton were highest at 67%, Bluffton 63%, rest of the county 56%, Beaufort down here at 53%. So a little bit of variation there on creating more housing, although as I understand it, there's not a whole lot of room in Hilton Head to build much more things. So going into this, I knew that there would be a lot of folks rating these things as very high or high. So I wanted to push our respondents and say, okay, what's your one top priority of those 5 things that are very hard, right? These are things that you have to deal with as elected officials. I'm trying to push my respondents and say, okay, what's your top priority? Well, we didn't really get a clear route here, which again, I think kind of speaks to the desire of people to have it all. We had 28% whose top priority was managing growth and development. We had 23%, kill this for 1 second, who said improving transportation was their single top priority. We had an 18% who said protecting open space was their single top priority. We had 17% who said that creating more housing was their single top priority. And finally, we had keeping taxes under control, 13%. So again, when you force the issue with people, not one thing stands out. You kind of like to say, okay, it always has to be our roads. Well, no, you got a lot of people who want to just manage population growth. But you have a lot of people who want to improve transportation. You have a lot of people who talk about protecting open space. So it's kind of that have it all. Since I'm doing this primarily for my friends at the Realtors, there's a little more depth into the housing. I'm going to get this in a second, but younger people, people of color, and non-homeowners, they tended to rate that more affordable housing at the top. But that just kind of gives you just how conflicted and divided people are when you try to force them to pick one priority. There wasn't a whole lot of variance by county. by the geographic breakouts. Every region mostly ranked these the same way. The unincorporated areas, they were a little higher on managing population growth and development and a little higher in their rank order in terms of protecting open space. But there wasn't much regional variance on that forced choice question. I did all sorts of demographics here. I don't want to get too geeky, but if you look at, if you ask me who's the profile of who cares about what, managing population growth and controlling development, that tends to be most important for seniors, women over 50, postgraduates, and college-educated women. They're the ones who really prioritize that. Improving transportation, that tended to be higher among men with college degrees, older men, and newer residents, people who kind of got here many times from the Northeast. They're like, where's the more roads? Where's their bridges, right? Protecting open space, that tends to be higher among younger residents, college women, younger college graduates. They kind of are more into the green space, protecting green space. And creating more housing, I just showed you that. That tends to be higher among non-homeowners, not surprising, younger voters, and those who just have a high school or less. Oh, I'm sorry, keeping taxes. People of color and men with college degrees were the ones who tend to rate keeping taxes low up high. Okay, still with me? A lot of numbers. Get a hit of water here real quick. Okay, so from here we're going to go into a little more housing deeper dive. So again, keep in mind we've kind of gone through quality of life, we've gone through priorities, and so now we wanted to ask some housing specific questions of our registered voters. And we wanted to start with just quantifying the problem. How much of a problem is the availability of housing that's affordable to middle and lower income people in your part of Beaufort County? That is to say, the number of affordable houses, condominiums, or apartments that are available to buy or rent. Now I know there's a little bit of subjectiveness going on here, but it's hard for me to really start throwing numbers at people, houses over 200,000, houses over 400,000. We want this to kind of be, to your experience, what's affordable to you? What is, we don't want to try and enforce things on people. We just say, how do you see the availability of housing that's affordable to middle and lower income people? So the short answer is, it's a big problem, right? 63% call it a very, very big, 42%, or a fairly big problem in their part of Beaufort County. And then another 20% say that it's a moderate problem. So pretty much everybody in the county acknowledges and recognizes the problem of housing that's available to either buy or rent in the county. No surprise here, I don't think, but again, just to quantify and show you how much people are aware of this as an issue. Hilton Head is a very big problem, 51% of that, and another 24% fairly big, so 76% on Hilton Head say it's a very or fairly big problem. But even when you get out here to the rest of the county, 45% very big problem, Beaufort 37, and Bluffton 37. So again, countywide, if you look over here, it's almost 6 out of 10 who call the availability of affordable housing, be it renting or buying, a very or fairly big problem. There's going to be variations within that by demographics. Our non-homeowners, younger women, non-college under 50, they're especially pressed by these housing costs. You see at 70% calling it a very big or fairly big problem. If you're kind of in that younger, getting started, non-college folks, you can see where that squeeze really is. But again, even if you're a college graduate over the age of 50, you're very aware, 61%, that the availability of housing is a problem in the county. So from there, we wanted to drill down a little bit and kind of put a face on things and ask about housing for specific kinds of groups, and ask whether there was too much, too little, or the right amount of the following for this kind of housing for these kinds of people, for certain groups of people. And we asked about housing for young people who are just getting started in their careers, housing for hospitality and service employees, housing for public service employees like fire, police, housing for healthcare workers, nurse assistants, and housing for older people who are looking to downsize or have special needs. Is there too much, too little, or about the right amount of that? Well, young people, 69% too little housing available for young people just getting started in their careers. 62% too little housing available for hospitality workers. 54% too little housing available for public service employees like fire and teachers. 54% too little housing available for healthcare workers like teachers and nursing assistants. And then finally, at the bottom, 41% housing for older people who are looking to downsize or have special needs. So again, this kind of puts a number and a face. Once you kind of say, okay, here's this kind of housing, you can see that there's a real acknowledgement that the hospitality and service just doesn't have enough housing. And also for younger people who are kind of just getting started. But again, majorities here, public service employees and healthcare workers, also people are seeing a real shortage for that kind of housing as well. So again, this is kind of a way to kind of quantify that earlier problem and to kind of show where people see some of this housing is. Again, women are going to be more aware or more likely to perceive a problem than men. In almost every category, you're going to see women are going to be a little bit higher. And we'll make these slides available to everybody. We're going to post this up. Younger people, this is what was one thing interesting about Beaufort. Normally when I ask these batteries, it's people under 50 who are really aware and really feeling pinched by housing. And those numbers tend to be higher. In Beaufort, there really wasn't as much variance as I would expect. And in fact, older people tended to be more aware of some of the, or more ready to identify this housing shortage than under people. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And I think that probably speaks to some of our older residents who may be having trouble finding service employees or finding those healthcare workers. Again, kind of when you put a face on it, you see how that really pops out when you ask people, do you think there's enough housing for these kinds of workers? Whoops, what did I just say? Thank you. Also have this broken out by region. Hilton Head, this is hospitality and service employees, 72% too little housing for that. But again, it's the awareness is everywhere. It drops down as you go down to Beaufort, the lack of housing for those kinds of folks. Public service employees, again, Hilton Head's going to lead the way, but majorities of everywhere else see too little housing there. Healthcare workers, again, Hilton Head's going to lead the way in saying there's too little of that kind of housing. But again, it's pretty pronounced everywhere. Older people, that's the one place where Hilton Head kind of falls back. 54% say there's about the right amount of that kind of housing. But the rest of the county and in Beaufort saying there's too little housing for older people, folks looking to downsize. So, housing growth and development. So, what I like to do with the polls, and now remember, we've kind of already gone through, our respondents have talked about quality of life, we've asked them those questions. We've asked them questions about priorities. We've asked them questions about what kind of housing. We've even had them rate the problem of housing, right? So there's a little bit of order effect bias here going on. So I just want to be clear because some of these subsequent numbers are really going to underscore the conundrum that you face. What I'd like to do is say, okay, I'm going to read you some statements, and I just want you to tell me if you agree or disagree with each one, okay? And the statements that we read were, Beaufort County's population keeps growing. We need to improve our roads and bridges to accommodate for increased traffic and usage. We need more housing. Whoops, sorry, I'm going to back that up for a second. We need more housing that's affordable to be built in my neighborhood. That's the rub, right? We should change county zoning laws to make it easier to build multifamily homes like townhomes, duplexes, and triplexes. And the benefits of new housing development outweigh the drawbacks. We said, do you agree or disagree with that statement? And then we follow that up. Do you strongly agree or somewhat agree? So I think we all know how this first one's going to turn out. Beaufort County population keeps growing. We need to improve our roads and bridges to accommodate for increased traffic and usage. 72% strongly agreed with that statement. 21% somewhat agreed with it. That's basically 93% of people in the county. You're in total agreement that that needs to happen. We need more housing that's affordable to be built in my neighborhood. Well, look at what happens. Now we drop off. 48% agree with that statement. Only 29% strongly agree with that statement. I've done a lot of housing and rezoning work in my life. Don't trust this 19%. We should change county zoning laws to make it easier to build multifamily homes like townhomes and duplexes. Look at that. Strongly agree number suddenly drops to 12%. Only 26% somewhat agree. And then the benefits of new housing development outweigh the drawbacks. Only 37% agree with that statement. So I think this really, again, quantifies just the, what you're up against here. Yes, everybody wants something done about roads. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Priority number one. Even after we have had them rate housing problems, housing availability, how much to housing is there, we only had 48% who agree that we need more housing that's affordable to be built in my neighborhood. We only had 39% who want to change zoning laws to make it easier to build more dense housing. And only 12% strongly agreed with that. And then down here, the benefits of new housing development outweigh the drawbacks. That's your education problem right there, right? You have 58% who actually disagree with that statement right now. So there's, again, I think this probably quantifies every housing conversation you've had internally and externally, but it does kind of show you how people really start to pull back when we start talking about things being built in my neighborhood, rezoning, and the benefits. So just to give you some of the demographics behind this, we need more housing that's affordable to be built in my neighborhood. If you are a non-homeowner, remember that's only 20% of my sample, 72% agree with the statement, right? But if you're a homeowner, 56% disagree. There's going to be, if you're a woman under 50, 66% agree with that statement. But if you are older, 50 plus, you start to see a lot of disagreement with that statement. We need more housing that's affordable to be built in my neighborhood. Interestingly, 57% of Hilton Head agrees with that statement. 53% of the rest of the county agrees with that statement. But you get out to Beaufort and Bluff and you start to get a little more pushback, you see how that intensity starts to come out. The benefits of new housing outweigh drawbacks. Again, Hilton Head, they're kind of split on that. You got a lot of PhDs, you got a lot of people who are retired and they're going to intellectually say, okay, yes, right? But when you get outside of Hilton Head, 60% are disagreeing with that statement. And those are the folks who are trying to get over the bridge, trying to get to work, trying to get to places. Change county zoning laws to make it easier to build multi-family homes. Again, it's only going to be homeowners and your youngest people who are going to agree with that statement. Once you get over it, it's going to be a lot of disagreement with that statement. Changing zoning laws, again, Hilton Head's kind of split on that. You get outside of Hilton Head, and you're having 60% or higher disagreeing with that statement. Still optimistic? Roads and bridges. Last section. Switching gears again, in general, how would you rate the condition of roads and bridges in Beaufort County? Only 3% say they're excellent. 34% say they're good. But you got a lot of people down here at 46% just fair, and 18% saying that they are poor. So that's 64% rating the quality of roads and bridges, only just fair or poor. I then asked, when it comes to things like roads and bridges and sewer systems, how much of a need is there for infrastructure improvements and new projects in Beaufort County? Now, I'm really just kind of setting the table here. I mean, obviously, given everything else that we've seen, this might have been a redundant question, but I didn't know that going into the poll, right? But basically, everybody, 52% say that there is a great need for infrastructure improvements. 39% say there's somewhat of a need. Again, almost universal agreement that we need infrastructure improvements in the county. There's no reason to break that out. Now, the hard part, again, I just asked them, do we need this thing? How much of a need is there for this thing? And we said, okay, well, county leaders are looking for ways to fund infrastructure improvements like road, bridges, and sewers. I'm going to read you some possible ways to increase county revenues to pay for these projects. For each one, please tell me you think this is an acceptable or unacceptable way to increase revenue to pay for county infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, and sewers. And our scale was that's completely acceptable, somewhat acceptable, don't know, somewhat unacceptable, or completely unacceptable. Okay, we tested impact fees paid by developers and housing construction companies. Everybody's okay with that. 59% say that's completely acceptable. I'm not paying it. They're the ones who are building all this stuff. They need to pony up. 24% say that's somewhat acceptable. Now, we didn't say, oh, and by the way, that makes a house cost $5,000 more, $10,000 more. We just tested the concept of an impact fee, which sounds great to everybody in theory. A county sales tax increase? Not so much. Only 12% call that completely acceptable, 33% somewhat acceptable, 22% somewhat unacceptable, 31% completely unacceptable. And property tax increase, probably don't want to go there. Only 28% say that's an acceptable way, 46% completely unacceptable. So again, I think it underscores, I know you've tried or are thinking about perhaps putting some of these, a sales tax referendum. You know, right now voters are split on that, but I've done a couple of these in South Carolina. It's really hard to make these work. I'll show you some demographics here in a second. But impact fees, folks are comfortable with because it's not coming out of their pocket. They say they're okay with the county sales tax increase. I was a little surprised last night when I went and bought something and realized I was paying 9% more for what we don't have that in Virginia at those high, so those are already pretty high. A property tax increase, 70%, reject that outright. Now you are going to see, I broke this county sales tax a little bit just to kind of give you a sense. Remember, these are all registered voters. These aren't necessarily the people who are going to show up to vote. But older folks are a little more split on this, but younger people, non-college women, folks who are kind of a little more stressed on their budget, 63% reject that. The only folks who accepted it were college men, 56%, but everybody else is majority opposed, and that's before you put something on the ballot and said what it's going to be for. But you know, this isn't a ballot question. I'm not saying this is a political question, but there is some openness to it depending on how you do it. We can talk about that in the discussion section. Now, I then just want to kind of push people and said if one county tax had to be increased to pay for essential infrastructure improvement in Beaufort, things like roads and bridges, which one of the following taxes would you be willing to raise? And I just asked about county sales tax or the county property tax. Well, 58% said if you had to raise one, and I didn't have a choice, they said it's sales tax. 25% of my respondents said, I don't want either one. I didn't even give them that option. They just said, I refuse to have any of my taxes raised. So that's kind of your hardcores. And only 15% said they'd rather see the property tax raised. So that kind of gives you a sense of you know, if push came to shove, sales tax is something that folks are a little more open to. But again, think of that earlier question where you didn't have a lot of people who said that was completely acceptable. Most of them were in the somewhat acceptable. So that is a ton of numbers. I appreciate you going through it all with me. I'm just going to summarize real quickly what we just did and then open it up to any questions or maybe Josh something want to say a word or two. Again, I think that, you know, when I look at this, there's great concerns about recent population growth and development, and that really adversely affects Purdue housing. You know, generally, people are very happy with the quality of life, and then, again, I don't want to underscore, I don't want to underplay just how good that quality of life number is. I know we talked about the intensity being up, but people like living in Beaufort County. It's a great quality of life, and that's what people are focused on right now. The recent shifts, to me as a pollster, sorry about that, that so high say it's gotten worse in the last 3 years, and looking forward, they think it's going to continue to get worse. That's a real red flag for me as when I'm looking at this data. The thing that would most improve quality of life, traffic and roads, limiting development. We saw that folks are really placing a very high priority on most of the things that we tested in the poll. We saw that the shortage of affordable housing is very apparent to most of our respondents. The lack of housing for young people and service employees really stood out. But even with that, despite acknowledging the housing problem, voters are hesitant to embrace new housing development because of all the problems they're seeing with traffic and sewer and all the rest. 2/3 feel the roads and bridges are either just fair or poor. There's a great need to improve that infrastructure. They're open to impact fees, but they really push back against sales and county taxes. So, Josh, I don't know if you wanted to say anything, or I'm open to reactions, questions, discussion, however you guys would like to
Let me know when you'd like to say something. I'll bring the mic to you.
I'm kind of confused. Your polls show that they want to slow down growth.
Mm-hmm.
But then in turn, they say they want the developers to pay for the growth. Can't have it both ways.
I don't know if you're an elected official, right? Yes. I mean, yeah, so welcome to your world, right? I mean, it's a tough problem, but that's where people are just kind of conflicted on it. And, you know, I don't have the answer to that. I have some ideas, but you know, it is the problem of what voters see every day as they're trying to get to work or they're trying to run their errands. But also understanding that my kid can't afford to live here. My kid can't rent here. My kid can't get to the job, you know, and I think that's what was really interesting on that age breakout one that I showed, that older folks understand this. And I think that, you know, when I do focus groups and things in the area, I didn't do one here, but that's kind of what I get back, is there is that conflict of, I came down here for a reason. I love the quality of life. I want, you know, Hilton, I want the golf, or whatever, you know, that people are coming here for. But how do you make that work with the amount of space that we have?
Did you take into consideration that two things? The county population is probably 40–50% non-residents, and second, roads and bridges are typically paid for by the state.
The former question, you say 40% are non-residents? I'm not sure I understand that.
Second home.
Second home. We only talk to people who are registered to vote in Beaufort County.
Have you done any other surveys in areas where you have that type of non-resident resident?
Nothing comes to mind. The second part of the question was?
You mentioned roads and bridges, but roads and bridges are really a responsibility of the state, not the county, in most situations.
I think that your average voter, it's the distinction without a difference.
Question? You showed us that they established a priority for infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And their choice for funding infrastructure would be a sales tax as opposed to a property tax. Yet we had a sales tax referendum that failed. So what would you attribute that failure to, since that's the thing that they would prefer? They've all agreed we should do it, yet they didn't pass the referendum. Was it a failure to educate people about who's paying when the sales tax is implemented? You know, they say 40 to 50% of money collected comes from people who are visiting, as opposed to people who live here. And the people who pay the sales tax are being taxed on things that, there are a lot of things that are exempted from sales tax, so you have to buy something that's taxable. So what went wrong with us?
When was that referendum?
Recently.
Like 2021, 2023?
Last year.
Last year, yeah. Okay, so I think there's a couple things going on. I've done referendums in Greensboro and Greensboro and somewhere else in South Carolina. So I didn't poll that specific one. I mean, inflation. I mean, that is just one thing. You're asking people to go in the ballot box and increase the amount of taxes they're paying at a time when the inflation numbers were still fresh in their brain. That definitely killed us in two that I was involved in 2024. The trust number that we showed, just the lack of trust in local government. One question I always ask when I'm in these referendums is, whether you agree or disagree, county already has enough money, they just need to spend it better, or they need to spend it wiser, and people tend to believe that. They think there's enough money already in there. They're paying these sales taxes, they're paying their property taxes, and they just think there's that kind of waste and fraud. And so when you get into the ballot box and you're asking people to raise their own taxes, it always ends, if I poll at 53, 54% yes, 2 weeks before a sales tax or any property tax referendum, I know I'm going to lose. Because I know on election day, that number is going to be about 5 points lower than what my last poll was.
All those things you're talking about now that would discourage people from voting, what's the answer on how to, is it a lobbying effort, an educational effort? What do the elected officials have to do to try and develop more interest and a logical approach, reasonable approach to fixing the things that need to be fixed?
Yeah.
Someone has to pay for it.
Right. I mean, it's a community-wide effort. You got to get businesses behind and have businesses and hospitals, medical, everybody kind of really underscoring the numbers and the problems. I think some of those, the problem that people see with service employees, with medical folks, just finding housing for them, there's going to be a business component to it. Campaigns that I've seen have worked have a lot of the kind of, and I think you do this here, maybe you did this in the past where you actually itemize exactly how the money is going to be used and what the sunset is. That helps a lot, where people can kind of see exactly where the money is going to be spent. But 2022, 2023, 2024 were bad times to ask people to raise their taxes. But these are always hard to do. It takes a full-fledged campaign, and it really takes not just you elected officials telling folks, it really takes the community, nonprofits, businesses, everybody behind what the need is.
I'm pretty confused by your housing, the affordable housing slides. You spent a lot of time talking about how many people, or the percentage that wanted that was important to them, but then one of the first slides said it was only 10% of the answer to quality of life. And then 80% of the people are homeowners. So it seems like, I don't know how they're personally answering that question.
Sure.
Okay.
So remember the first slide was what I called an open-ended question, where I asked them to kind of volunteer what the single thing was most important to them in terms of quality of life that could improve. So they only got one choice, but they could have said two things, but their focus there was on traffic and growth. 10% of the people in that initial slide said they brought up housing costs. Now later on in the poll, I was just, because clearly you can say, okay, well, housing is a problem, but I also wanted them to quantify how much of a problem housing costs were as well, where I actually gave them those scales to choose from.
But if 80% are homeowners, you're really talking about the 20%, or they're hearing that it's a problem, or they're how are they? Why do you think it's a problem?
Oh, okay. Well, I think because I assume there is some efforts going on in terms of. I think that's where we put the face on the too little, too much. I think people understand and are reading and learning. And again, I think it's for parents a lot of times, their kids are trying to afford housing. But it's not, if you're looking around if your kid's trying to buy a home, or if you're looking to do a move down home, or if you're looking to do a move up home, you still see what's going on with the market, right? You're going to get health care. You may have a good relationship with your nurse or your physical therapist who's explaining to you, man, I can't rent here. I'm sorry I'm late for my appointment, but it took me an hour to get across the bridge, right? I mean, it's not a problem that is behind the scenes. People understand the problem. The rub is when you push them to say, well, what do we do about the problem?
Hi, good morning. Patsy Bryson, Hilton Town Council. First of all, I want to thank the Realtors Association for this information and the data, and I appreciate that we're going to get the more detailed slides. I was madly making notes, but it would be helpful. Thank you. And it does give me a lot of comfort with regard to our recently adopted strategic plan and the focus on the strategies that we have. So it does tell me that we were right about what people are thinking and where strategies ought to be. It doesn't help us to solve them, but it certainly helps us to know that that's what your survey is showing. And then I followed it up with the question about the sampling size of 600 throughout the county, because I think folks are going to then say, well, great data, but is that too small of a sampling size? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, it's actually a pretty large sample size. Normally when you're doing a survey, you're looking for, again, a county survey, you can do 400, you can do 600, you can do 800, you can do 1,000. The payoff is really in the subgroup analysis. So the difference between a margin of error for a sample size of 400 is plus or minus, I think, don't quote me, 4.9 percentage points. The difference on a sample size of 1,000 is plus or minus 2.9 percentage points. So the difference isn't that much on the base sample size, it's on the subsample size. So if I have a larger sample, that means I have more men, I have more women, I have more people of color, I have more whites, so I can look at my subgroups a little bit more. So that's why we went with the 600. Jocelyn actually, and the local Realtor Association, NAR usually only pays for a 400 sample interview, but we wanted to make sure we could look at the subgroups a little bit more, so we did those extra 200 interviews. I understand that people are going to look at 600 and say, oh, that's too small, but all I can say there is you either believe in the miracle of the random sample or you don't, and I'd have to walk folks through a statistics class to kind of like really underscore that. So, you know, it's a long conversation as to where you get that. You know, your bell curves, you remember your statistics classes back in things. So it's actually a really good sample size for a pool like this. Yeah, we would love to have done 1,000, but 1,000 costs more.
My takeaway as I looked at this is that you take the two big items, roads and growth. There's very limited things we can do with the growth. That horse is somewhat out of the barn already.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, people's upset with growth may be somewhat a function of the transportation of the roads. So and the other ones to other extents may or may not be the same, or may be something that the public sector and the private sector should take care of. So my takeaway from all this is that roads are job one by a gigantic margin, and everything else almost pales by comparison.
I think that's correct. But as elected officials, you know, you don't have the luxury to just do the one thing, right? And so I think that your takeaway is correct. That doesn't mean the housing problem and the other things are going to go away.
Got to do the others also.
Yeah. You must have a question. You've been looking and writing and things. Or a reaction.
Well, there was one line in there that I saw you had some differentiation between folks that have lived here for more than 10 years and folks that have been here for less than 10 years. It'd be interesting to see that applied to a lot more of the questions to see, because I think a lot of the assumption is people who have relocated here within the last 3, 5, 7 years, it's great that I made it here, but now that I'm here, I don't want anybody else to come here.
Pull up the drawbridge.
That's it. And so, again, kind of just highlighting what we assume and letting the numbers kind of bear that out.
I'll do a little to get that to Jocelyn. It's a great point. It also goes to one of your questions as well. A lot of these people are coming here from Jersey, Connecticut, Northeast, where they've seen this story before. And when you put a tax increase on the ballot, they're like, you know, because I just left New Jersey because my property taxes were so high. You know, or I just left Connecticut because the sales taxes were so high. And so that recent arrival thing, they're still kind of giddy at how low the taxes are here, but they don't want to open the door. And you can't have a hard time convincing some of those more recent arrivals to back a tax increase because they're worried it's going to happen here, what happened to them from whence they came.
You used the word conundrum, and there's this whole survey is loaded with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't develop, but I need a primary care provider. I need a fireman. I need a nurse. If you don't develop, they're not going to come because they have no place to live, and we're facing that throughout. So many people they don't want to grow, but they don't understand that the money must come from them because the state is not going to fix the roads. But they don't understand it. So there's a lot of conundrum in there. So my takeaway of this is that as a body of elected officials, one of the challenges that we have is to control the narrative and let people understand. Somehow, we have to educate the consumer as to what we're dealing with. I don't know that we're doing the best job there. And that trust thing came up, and it's constantly coming up. So I think we have to control the narrative better as an elected body. And I think my takeaway is that in order to do that, we have to band together as a region, even more than what we've done. And I think this region's done a pretty good job at that. But we have to band together not only as groups of elected officials, but also, and it's brought up, the partnerships with our hospitals and other key essential services that people are looking for.
Yeah, I think that's all absolutely right. And you know, what I've seen in other places is, I remember, it took people 15 minutes to get through that survey, either on the phone or on their, or taking it on their phone or iPad or wherever they took it. We're really kind of forcing people to answer all these questions, right? They probably spend, that's 15 more minutes than they usually spend thinking about growth and development issues. But it does show you that conundrum. But mostly they want to be out golfing, they want to be out biking, they want to be out, working, they want to be out doing what they normally do. So I can't agree with you more that you just have to do that education and point things to people. And to the extent that there are developments that are ideal or that you feel like are working as elected officials, or if you feel like this dense mixed-use development in this area, people need examples. Like, you need to show them where this has worked, where we've done dense development. Go look at it. You can do this without affecting your quality of life. That's where we've had some success in some other campaigns that we've run. But it's really that community effort, I think, is the big thing in terms of the education and getting, like, just to reiterate, getting the hospitals involved, getting the medical community involved, getting the business community involved, just to kind of underscoring how bad the problem is.
Joe, I'm reluctant to ask another question because everyone now in the audience is looking at me saying he's going to ask another question. But I'm really focused on this educational lobbying portion of it. In your surveys, have you ever asked the question, do you favor a sunset provision in a referendum? And what's the reaction of people if you've asked that question? Does that convince them that maybe they would be more favorably disposed to voting yes?
The problem with it is that people don't believe it'll ever go away.
Well, you have to set it up in the ordinance.
Yeah, and it helps, certainly helps, but there is this kind of sense where I've done that, that people kind of feel, well, once it's on the book, they're just going to re-up it when the sunset time comes.
We raised $100 million a couple of years ago with the sunset provision, and we're using that for green space acquisition.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It wasn't overwhelmingly supported, but it's certainly enough to get it done.
It does not hurt. I'm not saying it hurts, but I'm just saying there's just that, it's that distrust thing comes in again.
Now that Larry's asked another question, I feel like I can. So you also mentioned that question about stormwater and stormwater infrastructure being identified as something that would be helpful or folks interested in. With a lot of the rain that we have here and our challenge with water rising, did folks tell me what the comments were about stormwater? Did they talk anything about having a resilience plan, or what else to do about stormwater?
Nothing comes to mind that I can remember on that. I'd have to go back and look on the verbatim question. I mean, you start talking about resilience plans, right? People just know they drive their car and they little water they gotta get through. So, I don't recall anything. I have to go back and look at that.
You ready for me, Justin? On behalf of the regional committee and 11 of our members that are here today, Jocelyn, thank you. Gene, thank you very much. and the National Association for putting this on for us today. And again, I thank you for what you did in 2018. Appreciate that effort as well. Joe, great presentation. It was well worth the 2-week wait. Thank you very much.
Hardyville, and I'm sure Bluffton, every community in Beaufort County has the same issue with planned development districts. Some of these have been made 20 years ago plus. Now the developers are starting to develop these. And the education portion is most of the residents don't understand that these are a legal contract, that the city must go ahead and approve. Now, the master plans, we do have some say-so on those, but the right to build in these areas were long before most of us, or at least me, were even in the low country. And the education is going to be very important to let these people know. But we, as a group of elected officials, do have some say-so on how that development will come out. Basically, with their access, with their roads, how this all goes. 278 out here is the main corridor for the majority of Beaufort County. It runs right through Hardyville. We're connected. We may be in 2 different counties, but we are connected. Your problems become our problems too. So the regional growth we got to get a handle on this. I don't know what the answer is. We can't turn to the state. We've seen how that's worked out. So we have to work as a group to find that answer.
I'm Alice Howard, Beaufort County Council. We knew that the trust level was very low. I didn't know it was that low. So how does that compare to other places? It looked pretty bad.
It's not as bad as I've seen in some other places. I'd say you're right in the middle of where that question usually comes back. But like I said, you really want it to be that most of the time number to be a little higher than where it was.
And I think that was a factor in the last sales tax, was a lack of trust. Have you seen that in other failed sales tax?
Oh yes, oh definitely. Yeah, no, the trust in county government is a huge factor in any of these things. And if there's been some recent scandal or if there's been some, whatever, fill in the blank on the scandal that never helps. And yeah, there's just people kind of go, I don't really trust those folks with my money.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can follow up on that, within that question of trust, were there any comments going back to the municipalities about the trust levels there? Because that would be very interesting to see.
Didn't see that. I have to go back and look at that one too. I didn't see that in the verbatim thing, but we hadn't really kind of gotten into that question yet.
So with the conundrum that I have probably asked every elected official in this room at some meeting, they often hear me say, how can you profess to be for affordable and workforce housing development, but anti-growth at the same time? And I've asked this question for years. So in looking at this, what I'm starting to wonder, is it possible that people understand we need the housing and they wouldn't mind the housing if the roads and bridges were all right? So if we took care of our infrastructure, is it possible that the pushback against growth is because we're all having trouble getting around?
So, do you want to comment on that? Or?
One comment earlier said that as a region we have to grow together, or we have to do our homework together. Well, that defines us growing smarter together. So when we get to a point now that our growth management department has to be very strategic in understanding what the left hand is doing so the right hand can be in the same sequence. We definitely have
some mistrust in housing plays a major role in that, as well as infrastructure. But when we grow together, when we understand together how we can hear our constituents, and that's one of the reasons why we are in this place of distrust, because they don't believe we listen. There's times when I've said this many times, we get elected and then we use our own judgment. We don't listen to our constituents. So that has to be the new call of the day, is that they think we hear them and then we respond. For an example, your survey today, in that education piece, we need to let them know that we heard their cry. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just on both those comments, I mean, this gentleman's earlier, if growth is going to happen because it's on the books and it's there, people see it, but then you go and you see, well, they built 50 houses here, and there's only one way out, and there's only a stop sign. And people notice that. People see that kind of stuff. And that's what drives them nuts, I think, to your point, too. It's like, is anybody talking to each other? How does how does the ambulance get into that development? How does, there is that kind of thing that people see, like, once you get, to your point, to someone, okay, yeah, improving the roads would go a lot towards, I think, people being more receptive to growth. But then when that growth happens, they have to look at some of these developments and say, was anybody thinking about, how I was going to be able to get out of here? Or was anybody thinking about how we were going to be able to get from this part of town to that part of town? Like, that's the things I hear when we do focus groups on this. It's like, nobody thought, I think to your point, or Saint's point, how all this worked together. Right? I believe you were making that point earlier.
Thank you. I believe that probably everybody sitting in the room kind of expected the outcome that you presented. The number one item being transportation, which is correlated to growth. But part of the conundrum, is the word you kept using, is the fact that even if you stop growth today, we're already in a transportation crisis. So, I think that nails it on the head for me. We all know that we have a transportation issue. Both the state, the county, and the municipalities have to figure it out, and we'll see where it takes us in the future.
I don't have a question. And that's the last thing I'm going to say.
Okay.
We very rarely have an opportunity to have a regional conference like this, and this is really great. There's a lot of people here that can make a difference. And we very rarely get people who will build an affordable housing project. And when they come in with purely affordable housing, there seems to be some political pushback, and they make it difficult for them to actually implement the plan to develop an affordable housing project. And I'm unclear why that happens. It's not addressed in your I'm just making a statement that when people come in and want to do that, they just can't seem to get to the goal line, and it's very troubling to find out that everybody wants to see, well, most people want to see this happen, yet when people come in with an idea, it doesn't ever seem to materialize. That's all.
So we
Question.
wrap it up?
One more question. So let me ask you, since you've done so many of these polls, when you see that people have a very clear understanding, let's say that housing is needed, but they absolutely don't want it where they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a message to elected officials that, hey, when you have a project that needs to happen, you're all just gonna have to face whoever you have to face, because NIMBYism's gonna be there, and we just gotta help empower our elected officials to move along with their projects despite public opinion? Or do elected officials need to be looking at this like, oh my gosh, we better not develop?
I mean, I don't really know how to answer that question. It's the bottom line. I mean, I don't think elected officials, they're listening to their constituents. And I think, again, you got to get back to the original quality of life question, that people want to protect their quality of life. They've made an investment in it. They like what they have here. That's tough, but quality of life includes things like good services. Quality of life includes things like being able to get to where you want to go. And you know, I'm not going to sit here and tell those of you who are elected to office how you come up with that. You know, I don't think there's an easy answer to that question.
So when you do a survey like this, wouldn't a great question be, where did you get your information?
Yes.
Because and I bring that up because there's a project, hospital project coming forward, and people are now putting their houses on the market because they think that it's going to be for Section 8. They think people are going to jump over their fence and go destroy their yard. They don't understand because they've been listening to the social media directors telling a story that isn't reality.
Yeah.
And when we come to a survey like this, where are you getting your information? How are you learning about these things? We talked about education, but the education is coming from the big mouths that are out there that aren't telling the truth. They're directing a story.
I mean, unfortunately, we didn't have time to really get into that in the poll, but it's harder than ever. I mean, just people are getting information from so many different sources now, and it's not like you just go onto Channel 3 like you used to and, you know, say something. You've got to have a multifaceted communications campaign.
I think from
Anybody else?
Well, one quick question.
From a real estate perspective, I feel that we hear that there's a higher demand for affordable housing, but we've also got an increasing inventory of affordable housing. I think a lot of the issues and questions that were brought up, like to your point, education is a big one, but more importantly, evidence of value of these decisions, how it's going to affect the residents, perhaps less island packet, more social engagement. I did notice that a lot of the higher statistics are also higher statistics in social engagement between the demographics. I think that a lot of people today are believing everything they see online and not realizing what the value of that is.
I mean, you do have a real supply and demand problem where you would think that, you know, increasing supply, most people would say, okay, more housing means prices should go down. And that's not the way most people perceive it. When I do focus groups on this, people are like, oh yeah, they're building those houses, but they're all $600,000 condominiums, $800,000 townhomes. I can't afford that. You know, we can't afford that. So I think that maybe gets a little bit to what you're saying. It's like you do have to, you know, sometimes when people see the development going on, they think it's just stuff that we can't afford. And then you get the problem with, you know, everybody saying, oh, it's just Section 8 housing. You know, it's like it's one or the other, and nobody believes there's, you know, good middle class housing that's being built.
So this comment, I think, is for our friends at Beaufort County. So you are looking at doing a sales tax referendum at some point in time in the future. I think this is an opportunity to use some of this data to help guide some of those decisions. And so at least what I'm seeing is infrastructure is a very high priority for a lot of folks, but they're only willing to pay for it through a sales tax referendum if there's no other option. If somebody else can pay for it, great. We'd love to see it happen. We really don't want to do it, but if we're going to do it, this is the only way that we're even remotely willing to consider it. And so you're trying to thread a very small hole with a needle in terms of getting the information to the right people who are willing to vote for it. It's 25%, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, we're going to vote against it. So that number just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller that you're really trying to target to educate them on this is a need of critical importance. It's not gonna go away, and this is the only way to pay for it. And so I go back to saying, I would hope that you would consider, if it's possible, looking at trying to break out some of the transportation projects to be separate from capital projects, because while they are both critically needed, one can negatively influence the other and vice versa. And so if you give the voters an opportunity to vote directly on it, if it fails, then you know that you've given it the best chance you can. I'm just concerned that if you've got something like $140, $150 million regional law enforcement complex with a sheriff out there upsetting half the population by signing a contract with ICE, is now the time to attach $150 million worth of road projects to that same proposal. And so, again, I just encourage you to use this strategically to help guide you moving forward.
Well, just to follow up on what he just said, because I always like to plug the Regional Citizens Committee and our Realtor associations. Going forward, should the county decide to move forward with the referendum, our groups would obviously meet and discuss things and see if there was something there that we could support or not, but, and then we have other resources and other types of polling that could really assist in target marketing the way you need to get something passed. We're always ready to be a partner.
Great, thank you guys.
Thank you all for coming so much. We really appreciate it.
Good luck.